Welcome back to the Spurgeon Legacy Podcast. I'm actually on location this time at the Spurgeon Library, which houses about half of Charles Haddon Spurgeon's 12,000 volume personal library, as well as many historical artifacts relating to the life and ministry of the Prince of Preachers, Charles Haddon Spurgeon. But surprisingly, I'm not in central London. I'm here in Kansas City, Missouri. And the story of how these books and artifacts came to be here on the campus of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary is an interesting one. Shortly after Charles Spurgeon died, his sons decided to sell part of his estate. Well, perhaps surprisingly, it was actually difficult to sell the many volumes of books that Charles Spurgeon owned. They were considered to be dusty old Puritan books, and at the time, they weren't well valued. Well, they sat unsold despite some things going here and there over the years until they were purchased by William Jewell College. Well, they were housed there for about a century until they were purchased by the campus of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, which eventually housed them here in the Spurgeon Library. Let's go inside and take a look. Even before you're in the library itself, there's a number of artifacts here in the entryway, including this, the Spurgeon Psalter. Charles Spurgeon used this exact Psalter in preparing his famous Treasury of David, his commentary on the Psalms that took over 2 decades to compile. The library contains, as I said, many volumes that were in Spurgeon's personal library, and the most common book that he has commentaries on is the Psalms. Charles Spurgeon would preach on the Psalms over 300 times during his lengthy ministry. Here's another commentary on the Psalms from Spurgeon's own library, which he used in his studies. But this one's unique in that it's the oldest book from Spurgeon's library. This commentary on the Psalms is from 1476. On January 6, 1850, a young Charles Spurgeon, about 16 years old, was walking to church in Colchester when a snowstorm blew in, and it was so fierce he ended up going to a different church, one that he had never been in before. It was a primitive Methodist church. He walked in and there were few people who had braved the weather to go to the service that day, the regular preacher being unable to make it. A layman stood up, whose name has been lost to history, and he preached a simple message from Isaiah chapter 45. "Look unto me and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth." Well, God used that simple gospel message to grab the heart of Charles Spurgeon, and he was converted on that day and in that chapel. These pews here are from the chapel that Spurgeon attended when he was converted in 1850. Also in the entry here of the library is this fantastic timeline of the man Charles Spurgeon and the events that happened in his life and ministry. And as you see, there's a number of artifacts that are included on the wall as well, in addition to pictures, photos, paintings, and other historical information. Born into a Congregationalist family, Charles would have been baptized as an infant. However, soon after his conversion, he became convinced of believers' baptism, and in May of 1850, he was baptized in the River Lark near Island Ferry. Here's some water from that river. There's a lot of other great information, photographs, paintings, and artifacts having to do with the life of Charles Spurgeon, again, even before you get inside the library. So there's a wealth of information about the life and times of the Prince of Preachers, from his early days in Stambourne, to his conversion in that primitive Methodist chapel, to his baptism in the River Lark, and beyond. So let's go inside and take a look at the library itself. One of the central artifacts here at the Spurgeon Library, quite literally, it's right in the middle as you walk in, is Charles Spurgeon's preaching rail. He didn't stand behind a typical pulpit like you might imagine, but he used a preaching rail and then a small desk to hold his Bible and his notes. This preaching rail is from Waterbeach, where he pastored for the first time. Behind me and all around the library, you can see about 6,000 volumes of Spurgeon's 12,000 volume personal library. After moving to London and becoming the pastor of New Park Street Chapel, Spurgeon was immediately popular, and you could even buy figurines of Charles Spurgeon, like this one from the 1850s, 1860s. It's a Staffordshire Spurgeon figurine, and you can see a young Charles Spurgeon preaching in the pulpit. Here we have Charles Haddon Spurgeon's writing desk, and an untold number of books, sermons, and letters would have been written from behind this very desk. Even if your professor is Charles Spurgeon, things in class can sometimes get a little boring. These notebooks contain students of the Pastor's College notes on Spurgeon's lectures, as well as doodles of the Prince of Preachers. Remember that snowstorm we talked about, where a young 15-year-old Charles Spurgeon went into that primitive Methodist chapel to get away from the snowstorm, and then he heard a simple gospel message from Isaiah. Well, this is the very pulpit from that chapel where Charles Spurgeon was converted in January of 1850. The Edison Phonograph, which is essentially an early version of a record player, or if you're younger than that, an early version of an MP3 player, or if you're younger than that, an early version of iTunes. Well, invented in 1877 by Thomas Edison, you could record your voice on these cylinders, music or whatever else, for playing back in your home. Well, unfortunately, no recordings of Charles Haddon Spurgeon preaching exist. However, his son Thomas did record some lines from one of Charles Spurgeon's final sermons at the Metropolitan Tabernacle. He recorded it into one of these Edison cylinders in 1905. Now, Thomas Spurgeon is said to have a very similar voice to his father Charles, and this is the closest that we can get to hearing the voice of the Prince of Preachers.
His service is life, peace, joy. Oh, that you would enter on it at once. God help you to enlist under the banner of Jesus Christ.
Long before the invention of YouTube or even movie theaters, traveling people would put on magic lantern shows. They would use this magic lantern, and it was a glass slides put in a kerosene-lit lantern to project slides on the wall or on a screen, and they would use that to tell stories, or in this case, give a narrative about a person's life. These would be backlit, and here we see there are 46 slides having to do with the life and ministry of Charles Haddon Spurgeon, covering everything from his birthplace all the way to his death. These slides come from the 1890s and were used in traveling shows to talk about the life and legacy of the Prince of Preachers. Well, I hope you enjoyed that look at the Spurgeon Library. You can come see the Spurgeon artifacts yourself here on the campus of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. You can check them out online at spurgeon.org.